Chapter 10:16. Pei Chichi put down the document in her hand and smiled. Let's just wait for her to dig her own grave. She paused and instructed little Wen. Don't provoke Boss Shen if you have nothing better to do. Otherwise, I can't bear the responsibility if she insists on blaming us for her own misfortune. Little Wen nodded. Understood, Boss Pei. She felt very excited at work every day. She was happy to see Shen Lian's misfortune. In the past, she only thought that Boss Pei was smart and learned things quickly. However, Boss Pei, who was only 23 years old now, was more scheming and farsighted. Little Wen's face was full of admiration. Pei Chichi glanced at her. You're as promising as Pei Huan now. Speaking of Pei Huan, Pei Chichi remembered that Pei Huan was about to give birth in a month. She could not take care of her every day. She wanted to let her be hospitalized a week in advance and let Little Mai take care of her. That would be safer. Pei Chichi went to see Pei Huan in the afternoon and told her plans. Pei Huan also agreed to move in half a month. Tang Yu was on a business trip these few days. Pei Chichi returned a little late, so old Zhao drove. When the car reached the rose garden, they saw a red sports car parked at the entrance. There was a woman in white beside the car. At first glance, it was a little strange. It's Shen Lian. Old Zhao's voice was a little tense. What was this crazy woman doing here in the middle of the night? Pei Chichi's eyes were a little cold. Uncle Zhao, stop the car. Old Zhao was shocked. Young mistress, this woman is crazy. You can't care about her. Look, she parked the car here. How can I get in? Pei Chichi smiled faintly and opened the car door. I still have you. There are bodyguards behind. Don't be afraid of her. Old Zhao stopped the car and followed immediately. He could not let young mistress suffer. At the black carved door, Shen Lian was dressed in white. Her face was also pale. Those who did not know would think that she was attending a funeral. Pei Chichi walked over and stood face to face with Shen Lian. Shen Lian's gaze landed on Pei Chichi's little face. After a while, she sneered, we haven't seen each other for so long. Pei Chichi, you're still as annoying as ever. It's my honor to make you hate me. Pei Chichi's lips curled up slightly. What brings you here so late at night? Her calm demeanor made Shen Lian even more annoyed. She narrowed her eyes and looked at Pei Chichi. You must be very proud of yourself now, right? Pei Chichi smiled faintly. If I were the one who won that piece of land, then Mr. Shen would be in the same situation today. Think about it, how could I be complacent? Shen Lian glared at her and sneered, Pei Chichi, when did you learn this hypocritical trick? Did I? Why didn't I know about it? Pei Chichi was still smiling faintly. Mr. Shen, it's not good to be at someone else's door so late at night. Please give way. Old Zhao also said, yes, this car has to go back. Miss Shen, you're in the way. Pei Chichi, this road is public. It's not yours. Shen Lian was a little rascal. Besides, she had drunk a little, so she was even more unscrupulous. Pei Chichi chuckled. Unfortunately, this road also happens to be mine. Shen Lian was about to refute that it was Tang Yu's, but Pei Chichi had already said, it's under my name. She raised her voice. Old Zhao. Mr. Shen refuses to leave. Call the security. Shen Lian sat in the car and rolled down the window. Let's see who dares to drive me away. Chapter 10:17. Pei Chichi looked at Laro Zhao. Laro Zhao understood, so he made the call. In less than 10 minutes, a large forklift drove over. The heavy body of the forklift rolled over the ground, causing the ground to tremble and rumble. Shen Lian only realized it after a while. Laro Zhao instructed, shovel that car away. Throw it wherever you want. The forklift drove forward. Shen Lian's eyes widened. She immediately started the car and backed off. What a joke. If it was shoveled down, her car would probably be scrapped. The expensive sports car backed off and the forklift drove forward until she reached the end of the road. Pei Chichi got into the car again. Laro Zhao, drive. Laro Zhao started the car again and looked at Pei Chichi from the rearview mirror. Young mistress, aren't you angry? What's there to be angry about? Pei Chichi smiled. She opened the window and looked at the boundless night outside. She smiled. She's just a frustrated drunkard. Lao Jiao was angry. She's just looking for trouble. She didn't expect young master to not be at home. Pei Chichi looked at Shen Lian driving the car back to the entrance. She didn't want to leave. She smiled. Call a few reporters over. Lao Jiao was stunned. Then he smiled. That's a good move. She probably won't dare to stay here anymore. Outside the door, Shen Lian was holding a bottle of wine and crying at the entrance of the rose garden. The reporters took pictures of her. Shen Lian looked up. Her face was full of tears. She was also shocked. Don't take pictures. Don't take pictures. She waved her hands crazily to stop the cameras. But her voice was drowned. It sounded so hoarse in the night. The reporters were like man-eating ants, swallowing her up. She stumbled up and wanted to get into the car. But she was surrounded by the reporters and couldn't move an inch. Shen Lian held her hair and broke down. Go away, all of you. But the more she broke down, the happier the reporters were. President Shen, may I ask if you are unwilling to come here? The reporter asked a sharp question. Is a man who doesn't love you that important? Shen Lian glared at that person and said sternly, who said he doesn't love me? Who said he doesn't love me? She covered her head with her hands. Go away. Go away. Do you hear me? I'm the mistress of this place. Get lost, or I'll call the police. She looked very hysterical when she was drunk, and the reporters kept snapping away at her. Rose Garden's main residence. Pei Chichi stood in the hall. Elder Zhao walked over. He's finally gone. It's been lively for a long time. It's time to end. Pei Chichi smiled. Uncle Zhao, you should go to bed early. After Lao Zhao left, Pei Chichi stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the endless night. Shen Lian, are you in pain? Does it hurt a lot? But Tang Xin's final moments were even more painful. She was your sister, how could you bear to hurt her like that? You knew what she would do, but you still did it. In your heart, are you so selfish that you don't even care about family? Pei Chichi didn't want to be like Shen Lian. Although Shen Lian was hateful, she knew that she still had some kindness towards Shen Lian. However, Shen Lian was still unrepentant and went further and further away. Shen Lian's scandal in Rose Garden was exposed, and her image took a hit. The shareholders of Jin Taihe were suspicious and dissatisfied with such a superior. Chapter 10:18. Shen Lian's behavior was definitely not what a decision-maker should do. Although the shareholders didn't say it out loud, they had discussed it in private and wanted to replace Shen Lian. Shen Lian certainly understood that, but she couldn't change the current situation of Yuzhu Building. She went to countless departments, drank a few times, and gave out a lot of gifts, but no one dared to guarantee anything. Miss Shen, things are different now. This matter has been blown out of proportion, and now we're letting it go. In the future, if anyone doesn't think it through and becomes a keyboard warrior, I won't be able to keep my hat, not to mention your Yuzhu Building. Somewhere, he patted her on the shoulder. But since Miss Shen is so enthusiastic, I'll give you some advice. Shen Lian tilted her head. What is it? Zhong Chu smiled. Bring in foreign capital. The higher-ups have always been lenient with foreign capital. As long as we find a large foreign company and give up some shares, it won't be difficult to solve this problem. Isn't this equivalent to giving up? Shen Lian looked at Zhong Chu with some wariness. Zhong Chu said earnestly, how can this be considered as giving it up to others? Miss Shen, this is a cooperation. He saw that Shen Lian's expression was a little relaxed, and he coughed lightly. We're in a business, so we need to learn to be flexible, right? Shen Lian thought for a long time, and then said softly, Jin Taihe wants to control the shares. This may be a little difficult. Zhong Chu looked a little reluctant. If the name doesn't change, it will be very difficult to pass. He paused. There are a lot of floating people in B City, and the matter of Yuzhu Building is so serious, but as long as the boss and the name are changed, it won't be so conspicuous, so, I don't agree. Shen Lian raised her head. I will never give up that building, even if it's there to rot. She wouldn't let Pei Chichi see her as a joke. Zhongchu looked at her and smiled warmly. Miss Shen, you can't say things like that. Let's think about it again, okay? Shun Lian's tone was a little stiff. There's no need to think about it. Zhongchu laughed twice. Let's think about it again. Miss Shen, you can go against everything, but you can't go against money. These words touched Shun Lian's situation. After she endured for a month, the construction of Yuzhu building was completely stopped. The test results were not satisfactory. Many of the buildings that had been built had to be demolished and the pollution underground had to be dealt with before construction could start again. This was a huge and unpredictable budget. Under the condemnation of Jin Tai and the shareholders, Shun Lian contacted the French Newman Group under the arrangement of Director Zhong. Newman invested 30 billion in the construction of Admirable New Town, accounting for 51% of the total, and renamed Admirable to Elegant Residence. Even so, Jin Tai's shareholders were still very dissatisfied. They strongly blamed Shun Lian for the failure of her investment. Just this one incident had caused Jin Tai to lose more than 20 billion yuan. The shareholders want to remove her right of management very much. Shun Lian knows that they are reluctant to give up their dividends. As long as Elegant Building exists, their dividends will shrink at the end of the year. In the end, she had no choice but to sell 20% of her Jin Tai shares to Newman Company under the introduction of Director Zhong. Yuzhu Building was taken out of Jin Tai's capital system and became Shun Lian's private investment. But she didn't dare to let anyone know. Once it was known, her position in Jin Tai would be difficult to guarantee. Chapter 1019. The only thing she couldn't wait to do now was to clear her name. A piece of land with a source of pollution took up 1/5 of the Elegant Building. They spent a lot of money to demolish and clean up the already built building. That piece of land was finally planned to be a greenbelt in the community. This was something that had never happened in B before. Because of her own personal interests, Shun Lian opposed it. However, the foreign executive of Newman Company said to Shun Lian coldly, "Miss Shun, you don't know anything about marketing. It's hard for me to imagine how someone like you can be a CEO." Shun Lian was so angry that she wanted to vomit blood. In the end, she had to compromise because the foreign company took up 51% of the land. However, it turned out that Newman Company was right. Newman Company's handling of the crisis was definitely not as crude as Shun Lian's, who only wanted to bribe the officials to cover up the problem. To solve the problem that buyers were most concerned about, the water pipes of the Elegant Building were all custom-made and thick. It was a 3-layer structure with a vacuum in the middle to ensure that even if there was pollution in the land, it wouldn't invade the pipes for 200 years. Newman Company also held a demonstration, which was met with unanimous praise. The problem was solved. Newman Company didn't let Shun Lian have an easy time either. She was required to be present at many events. Shun Lian felt that the cold foreign executive was interested in her and wanted to see her every day. Those days were a nightmare for Shun Lian. Every day when she dragged her leg home, the stump was in pain. However, a month later, the Elegant Building was reopened with a new attitude. Shun Lian was extremely satisfied. Looking at the land that was once closed because of pollution being paved with grass, planted with a large number of trees, and even birds resting on it, she felt that she was alive again. Because the surrounding subway lines started construction at the same time, the price of the Elegant Building was 60,000 yuan per square meter, and the villa area was 100,000 yuan. The pre-sales were very popular. This had to be attributed to Newman Company's marketing. First, they threw out the problems of the Elegant Building in the past, and then released a large number of videos to prove that there was absolutely no problem living here, and the living environment was even better than other communities. On the official opening day, they first opened 10 high-rise buildings and 5 villas, and sold them in one day. Shun Lian could see how powerful the foreigner was. At the celebration party that night, she threw herself into the arms of the foreign man named Jack and successfully climbed into his bed. Jack took it all in, saying she was the most charming little thing in the East. Shun Lian was in the limelight for a while. In the rose garden, Pei Chichi was lying on her bed, watching the news with a lazy expression on her face. Tang Yu came out of the bathroom wearing only a bathrobe. What are you looking at? He lifted the blanket and lay down beside her. He had just showered, and Pei Chichi was a little greedy. She threw the phone at him and buried her face in his chest, her hands moving restlessly downwards. I guess you're not wearing anything underneath. She nibbled on his heart, her voice muffled. Tang Yu took her phone but didn't look at it first. Instead, he patted her head and said, Chichi, this is a man's line. She hugged him and said softly, but you didn't say it even once. Mr. Tang turned his head and looked at her. She was wrapped up like a lamb in her thick pajamas. He felt that he was in a difficult position. Pei Chichi looked at him with her bright eyes, full of expectation. Tang Yu smiled. It seemed that his little girl wanted to play games tonight. Chapter 10:20. Pei Chichi bit her lips and said in a weak voice, Tang Yu. He kissed her lips and said in a low voice, Chichi, don't move. Something thin and small fell to the ground. At this time, his fingers stroked her red lips again. His eyes were clear and bright, revealing the unique charm of a mature man. His voice was low and husky, Mrs. Tang, I guess there's nothing in your pajamas. She lay on her back and grabbed his bathrobe with her little hand. Mr. Tang, you can check it. He turned over and kissed her, obeying her will. When she was panting, he looked up and stared at her. Mrs. Tang, do you want to check it like this? She was aroused by him and took the initiative to kiss him with her slightly swollen mouth like a little kitten. Her little hands hung around his neck and her body was soft. Tang Yu's soul was being entangled. He patted her and said, Little one, what's the rush? He hit her once and she actually cried. Her long eyelashes trembled and 2 drops of tears fell on her thick eyelashes. Her little nose was also red, which was indescribably touching. Tang Yu's heart softened and he felt hot again. His big hands hit her twice, firmly. This time, it was terrible. She cried and cried, kicking him with her little feet and saying that she didn't want it anymore. But even this kind of crying was sweet, and he pressed her down, feeling indescribably satisfied and excited. It was probably a man's deep-rooted bad habits. Tang Yu did not care about anything else. After it was over, the little one lay in his arms, still crying softly like a child. Seeing her like this, he could not help but feel a little regretful. He couldn't help but wonder if he had hurt her. He immediately checked her gently. As soon as he moved, the little one cried again and said that he was bad. Chichi, let me see if you're hurt. He gently coaxed her and reached out to check the place where he had hit her. She kicked him with her little foot and angrily turned her face to the side. No, why would it hurt? He had a rough idea of what was going on. He smiled and pulled her into his arms. Pei Chichi's voice was like a little lamb. She pouted and said, You hit me. That's love. He admitted that he had been a little heavy-handed just now, but when he hit her, that feeling couldn't be stopped. It was as if she was addicted. Pei Chichi glared at him. You're shameless. Then I'll be even more shameless. Mr. Tang felt that since his little wife thought of him like this, he would be more beastly. So he pressed her down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pei Chichi was tortured to death. At night, she cried as she slept in his arms. His thoughts were as gentle as the night. With one hand holding the little fellow in her arms and the other holding the phone, she finally had the mood to read the news. That page showed the news of Shun Lian. Shun Lian was interviewed at the scene of the elegant building. Tang Yu opened the elegant building and slid through the pictures of the scene. The small green park was called Qin Yuan. It was named by Chichi. That's right, France's Newman Company was Chichi's doing. She had always wanted the G55, but Shun Lian also wanted it. It was no good to fight head-on. Even if they won, they would not get any benefits. Moreover, there was something wrong with the land, but it was not big. Chapter 10:21. The little Qin garden was prepared by her for Tang Xin. There was an abstract sculpture on it, which was based on Tang Xin, but Shun Lian had never seen it. It was a theme park with Tang Xin as the center, which was the only thing Pei Chichi could do for Tang Xin. She bought a villa for Shun Zhongshan and Mrs. Shun there for retirement, and the location was the best. She set up Shen Lian in every way, but she never attacked Shen Lian personally. Elegant Building and Newman Group took great advantage, but didn't it also save Shen Lian? Chichi could have waited a little longer, waiting for Shen Lian to fall into a worse situation, but she still gave Shen Lian a way out. Tang Yu's heart was soft and proud at the same time. He was not the one who taught Chichi these things, but she had learned them all by herself. He thought that she always complained that she didn't want to do business, and always said that she wanted to return Boyi to him. He could take over Boyi, but Jin Taihe was chosen by Shen Zhongshan to be his successor. Newman Group got 20% of Jin Taihe's shares, and soon Shen Lian would be removed from the position of the first shareholder. This was just around the corner. He turned his head and kissed the little fellow in his arms. His voice was a little hoarse. "Chichi, Tang Yu, I know you love me," she whispered in his arms. Tang Yu was stunned for a moment, and then he chuckled. Yes, he loved her. Deep love. At the summit in B City, Shen Lian and Pei Chichi met again. Shen Lian's face was full of pride. She looked at Pei Chichi and sneered, "Pei Chichi, you didn't expect it, did you? Elegant Building can sell so well." "Yes, I didn't expect it," Pei Chichi said lightly, "then congratulations, Miss Shen." Xiao Wen, who was beside Pei Chichi, couldn't help but say, "It seems that half of the ownership of the Elegant Villa is already in the hands of French Newman Company, right?" Shen Lian's expression didn't change. She smiled gently. "Even so, Elegant Villa is still a success. This development project is also profitable. As long as President Shen is happy." Pei Chichi smiled. Shen Lian snorted, and the two of them walked past each other. The new assistant by Shen Lian's side was the same as Shen Lian. She was good at flattery. She snorted as she walked, "President Shen, they are just bluffing. Who doesn't say that Mr. Shen has good foresight in investing in the G55 plot?" Shen Lian sneered, "Let her be proud for a few days. I want the sales of Elegant Building to give her a hard slap in the face." Exactly. Boyi's flowing water mansion is selling for 200,000 yuan per square meter. Only a ghost would buy it. The little assistant wanted to make Shen Lian feel better, so she flattered her. Shen Lian glanced at her and said softly, "There's no need to worry about sales in Shuixihua Manor. That location just happens to be the school district of a certain famous school. Although the sales aren't that great right now, you just wait and see. They'll definitely be sold out within 2 years." Shen Lian was quite jealous because this small district would go crazy from the competition. Pei Chichi was no longer someone she could look down on. However, Shen Lian didn't expect that there would be something that she couldn't look down on later. She was deeply shocked. After Elegant Building sold well for half a month, Newman Company held a celebration party at GM. This was suggested by Shen Lian. She deliberately wanted Pei Chichi to know. Chapter 1022. Shen Lian held a glass of wine and looked at the handsome and elegant Jack. She was a little drunk and leaned into Jack's arms. Her eyes were seductive. "Jack, you're the most powerful man I've ever seen." There was a hint in her eyes. Jack's blue eyes flashed with a touch of inscrutability. "Lotus, do you mean business, or, in bed? Let's go to the hotel room later, to discuss?" Shen Lian tugged at his tie and murmured. Jack's soul had been hooked. But this foreigner had a special characteristic. Business was business, private was private. Women were just his entertainment. At this moment, he suddenly stood up and coughed. "My boss is here." "Newman's CEO?" Shen Lian straightened up and looked over. She wanted to make friends with him. Jack was just a springboard for her. Such a man was just a lover. It was too far to talk about anything else. Shen Lian used the most perfect posture to welcome the legendary CEO Newman. But the moment she looked up, she was stunned. Jack's boss, the CEO of Newman, was actually Pei Chichi. Jack solemnly held Pei Chichi's hand and bent his knees to kiss the back of her hand. "Pei, you're beautiful tonight." "Thank you." Pei Chichi looked at Shen Lian and smiled. "Miss Shen is here too." Shen Lian was shocked. She still couldn't believe that Pei Chichi was the CEO of Newman. Impossible. She was shocked. She stared at Pei Chichi's beautiful and hateful face. After a long time, she squeezed out a word. So it's you. She looked at Pei Chichi suspiciously. So, you asked to change the name of Yuzhu? That's right. Pei Chichi held a glass of red wine and raised it high. She looked at Shun Lian's twisted face through the golden wine. He smiled faintly and said, President Shun, I advise you to tidy up your expression. Otherwise, when you appear in the newspapers, it will be too ugly. Shun Lian glared at her and gritted her teeth. Pei Chichi, you're so cunning. She had worked so hard to bid for the G55 plot, and Pei Chichi had raised the price by so much. In the end, her Newman had interfered and snatched half of the meat out of her mouth. How could Shun Lian not hate him? You think too much. Pei Chichi smiled indifferently. Shun Lian, the business world is like this. It's ever-changing. Shun Lian gritted her teeth. Pei Chichi, you've always had a sharp tongue. Pei Chichi looked at her and said, if President Shun thinks so, there's nothing I can do. Shun Lian was about to say something, but she suddenly thought of something and her face turned pale. Pei Chichi was Newman's CEO, and she had sold 20% of Jin Taihe to Newman. Then, so the 20% was now in Pei Chichi's hands? Shun Lian's heart was trembling. She felt that the tide was turning. A G55 plot had easily cheated her of her shares. All of this was Pei Chichi's conspiracy. You knew that there was a problem with the G55 plot, didn't you? Shun Lian's lips trembled and turned pale. Even if her face was covered with a layer of powder, she still looked very ugly at this moment. Pei Chichi did not deny it. Yes. Shun Lian took a step back and her eyes fell on Jack. Jack shrugged his shoulders, looking indifferent. He was just an executioner. As for the fact that he had slept with Shun Lian, beautiful women always made people unable to control themselves. Chapter 1023. Even if elegant building could make money, Shun Lian knew that she would lose more. She was facing the loss of the entire Jin Taihe. Pei Chichi could get 20% of the shares from her, not to mention the other shareholders. This insidious bitch was as despicable as her mother. Shun Lian was helpless. The next day, she was also in a daze at the meeting. She was always worried that one day, Pei Chichi would suddenly appear in front of her and take her place. At that time, she would really have nothing except money. But what did she need money for? What she didn't want to see the most was Pei Chichi, that bitch, being complacent and taking away Tang Yu, her parents, and even the company. There was a touch of hatred in Shun Lian's eyes. At this time, Meng Qingcheng reminded her again, Miss Shun. Shun Lian came back to her senses and looked at Meng Qingcheng. What? Meng Qingcheng's eyes fell on her face, and he said slowly, Director Wang is asking Miss Shun about the change of 20% of the shares. Shun Lian was shocked, and then she looked up and saw Director Wang's aggressive face. This old guy had always opposed her, and now it was the right time to force her. Shun Lian squinted and looked at Director Wang, and her voice was a little cold. Does this have anything to do with Director Wang? She tried to be calm, but these old foxes would not be frightened by her. He snorted, how can it not have anything to do with Director Shun? Previously, Director Shun had 48% of the shares, so we had nothing to say when she sat in the position of the highest management. But now it's different. Now, I am still the owner of the highest shares. Shun Lian's face was as cold as frost. Director Wang, you don't want to work anymore, do you? Looking at the arrogant look of this little girl, Director Wang sneered in his heart. In the past, Shun Zhongshan would give them some face, but when it comes to Shun Lian, she simply doesn't take others seriously and acts alone. He stood up and said in a loud and clear voice, we'll have to wait for someone to come before we decide. Shun Lian's heart sank. She already had an idea. Her face was cold. Director Wang, no one has time to waste with you here. Meeting adjourned. She had to stop Pei Chichi. She could not let Jin Taihe be taken by Pei Chichi. However, since Director Wang had said so, how could he give up so easily? He smiled cunningly and said, what is President Shun afraid of? Are you afraid that we'll find out what you've done? Shun Lian was furious. Chairman Wang, watch your words. I'm still the CEO of Jin Taihe. On the other hand, Chairman Wang was much calmer. "We'll know soon enough." Chairman Wang's words still carried some weight, because he had followed Shen Zhongshan to build his empire in the past, and he had 10% of the shares in his hands. It wasn't much, but it wasn't a small amount either. As he spoke, he personally walked to the door and pulled it open with both hands. Pei Chichi stood outside the door with her old team members beside her. The room was in an uproar. Pei Chichi walked in slowly, and Director Wang welcomed her and sat down in his seat. After sitting down, Pei Chichi looked to the side and said, "Lawyer Chen, show them the documents." Lawyer Chen nodded and passed the documents to everyone, including Shen Lian. After receiving the documents, Shen Lian was stunned. Then, she said sternly, "This is impossible. How could it be?" Pei Chichi actually had 30% of the shares. Chapter 10:24. That's impossible. That's absolutely impossible. Her voice was shrill. "Pei Chichi, you're lying. I'm going to call the police, arrest you, and lock you up for life." Pei Chichi looked at her agitated face and smiled faintly. At that moment, Director Wang opened his mouth. What he said was earth-shattering. "I transferred 10% of my shares to Boss Pei." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone present was shocked again. Director Wang smiled desolately. "I've followed old Shen my whole life and watched him live a glorious life. I didn't expect to die in the hands of the apple of my eye when I'm old. Everyone, I'm not selling my master for glory. Boss Pei is also Chongshan's daughter. She's more suitable to manage Jin Taihe than Shen Lian." The other shareholders nodded. Indeed, Jin Taihe had been going downhill for the past 2 years, and Shen Lian's decisions were becoming more and more doubtful. "Yes, I think so too. Yes, Boss Pei looks quite reliable. She's managing Boyi well." All these words agitated Shen Lian so much that she couldn't sit still. She shouted crazily, "Shut up! Shut up!" This was not true. She didn't believe it at all. Shen Lian's beautiful face was distorted and kept shaking. Then, she said sternly, "Where's the security?" "Security? Hurry up and drag this woman out. She's crazy. She's a lunatic." Shen Lian looked hysterical as if she had gone mad. Everyone sighed. Shen Lian was probably going to be destroyed. Pei Chichi's expression was indifferent. "As the biggest shareholder of Jin Taihe, I request for a new management." There was a lot of discussion. "That's right. Yes, Boss Pei is the biggest shareholder. We can rest assured if she's the president." Everyone was talking at once, pushing Shen Lian to the heart of the struggle. Her body trembled, and her lips trembled for a long time. She couldn't say a word. The situation was hopeless. She still lost to Pei Chichi. Jin Taihe's CEO was replaced by Pei Chichi, and Shen Lian was just an empty title. It didn't matter whether she came to work or not. At the Shen family villa, Shen Lian was wearing a pure white evening gown. Classical music was playing in the bedroom. It was a song that Tang Yu liked. She hummed a tune and danced along with the music, dancing, spinning, spinning. Even if her feet hurt like hell, even if her forehead was covered in cold sweat, she did not stop. From dawn to dusk, she seemed to be dancing tirelessly. That appearance was very beautiful. Today is the day that Pei Chichi works in Jin Taihe. Soon, she will remarry Tang Yu. She, Shen Lian, had finally suffered a crushing defeat. She had finally lost everything, and there was no way for her to make a comeback. She chuckled and took more than 10 pills from the dresser. She chuckled, "Dad, I once used this medicine to harm you. You must hate me in your heart. I'll give it back to you now." Shen Lian put the medicine in her mouth and picked up a glass of red wine. She swirled it gently and murmured, "What will happen if I drink this wine and this medicine?" It didn't matter anymore. Anything was better than living a half-dead, half-alive life like this. Her red lips were pressed against the cold rim of the glass, and she drank half of it in small sips. The wine mixed with the medicine entered her stomach. After calming down, it was followed by pain. At noon, the servants went upstairs to call Shen Lian for lunch. They knocked on the door for a long time, but it didn't open. When she opened the door, she was stunned. Even if he had taken medicine, why did he choose to take this kind of medicine? It just happened to make him stupid. Shen Zhongshan could pretend, but what if Shen Lian was also pretending? So, she had to see it for herself. When she opened the door, the beige ward was clean and tidy. It didn't look like a ward, but more like an apartment. Shen Lian was sitting on the sofa, wearing pure white pajamas. Her long hair fell on her shoulders. But her face was haggard. She was holding a little red flower in her hand. As she plucked it, she murmured, "He loves me. He doesn't love me. He loves me. He doesn't love me." Chapter 10:26. Pei Chichi stood at the door and watched. She had an indescribable feeling in her heart because she knew that the him that Shen Lian was referring to was Tang Yu. Shen Lian's doctor sighed beside her. She's been like this for a long time. All the flowers in the hospital have been plucked for her. Pei Chichi asked softly, "How is she doing? Is there any sign of improvement?" Dr. Lin thought for a moment. "Not good. She's fine during the day. She plays these boring games by herself. But at night, she often cries when she wakes up. When she wakes up, she refuses to go back to sleep. She just sits there for the whole night." He added, "She had a miscarriage before. She's always there at night asking for a child. The other patients don't dare to sleep because of the sound. Later on, she's the only one living on this floor." Pei Chichi was sad. She looked at her quietly for a long time. Can't she be cured? She had a rough idea that the child might be Jack's. Jack was the last person that Shen Lian loved. Dr. Lin thought for a moment and smiled faintly. This is a mental illness. It's up to her whether she recovers or not. Of course, we'll use medicine to control her emotions. At this moment, Shen Lian raised her eyes and stared at Pei Chichi. There was curiosity in her eyes, but there was also a trace of innocence that did not belong to Shen Lian. She looked straight at Pei Chichi and called out cautiously, "Chichi?" Pei Chichi felt that her mind was in a mess. She looked at Shen Lian and found a trace of Tang Xin in her face. Shen Lian pursed her lips and asked cautiously, "Chichi, don't you like me anymore?" "I'm Tang Xin." Pei Chichi felt a pain in her heart. It was as if an invisible hand was squeezing it. It was so painful that she could not breathe. Pei Chichi ran away. The person that she hated the most had turned into the person that she loved the most. That expression was so similar to Tang Xin. She did not dare to look because Shen Lian was not Tang Xin, but what kind of temptation was that? She would never forget that tone of voice. At this moment, it was like a needle poking at her heart. When they reached the ground floor, Pei Chichi stood there, panting heavily. Tang Yu came over and looked at her. "Chichi, what's wrong?" His hand was still on her shoulder. She looked up and her breathing was still rapid. "Tang Yu." Her voice was slightly hoarse, and her pupils constricted with a trace of terror. She heard herself speak slowly. "Tang Yu, Shen Lian, thinks of herself as Tang Xin." His fingers tightened, and Pei Chichi slowly came back to her senses, but she still couldn't calm down. She gasped for air, and there was something hopeless in her eyes. Tang Yu patted her back and pressed her into his arms. His voice was very soft. "Don't be afraid." Tang Xin was the deepest wound in her heart, a pain that she did not dare to touch. But now, it was torn apart by Shen Lian. She buried herself in his arms and trembled helplessly. It was as if she had returned to that day 2 years ago. When she woke up, she heard that Tang Xin was gone. The weather was clear that day, and many pigeons were cooing in the sky, but to Pei Chichi, that day was a nightmare. That day, she lost Tang Xin. She lost the Tang Xin who always called her Chichi in a soft voice. "Chichi, she's not Tang Xin." Tang Yu pressed her head tightly and told her over and over again that she was not Tang Xin. Chapter 10:27. On the way back, she was in a daze, and when she returned to the rose garden, she had a fever. Her fever was over 39 degrees, and her clothes were soaked with sweat. Tang Yu kept changing her clothes and cooling her down, and the family doctor stayed by her side the whole night. Late at night, Pei Chichi woke up again, sweating all over. When she opened her eyes, the bedroom was dark, and there was no one around her. She sat up in a daze, and saw Tang Yu coming out of the bathroom with a wet towel in his hand. She looked at him, and her eyes were as pure as a newborn animal, soft and docile. He looked at her for a long time, then walked over and reached out to touch her little head. "Are you feeling better?" Pei Chichi nodded in a daze, and then shook her head. Her voice was a little hoarse. "Tang Yu, what time is it?" He held her with one hand and raised his hand to look at his watch. "It's 4 o'clock. Change your clothes, drink some water, and sleep for a while." Only then did Pei Chichi realize that he was still wearing the clothes he wore during the day. He hadn't changed his clothes at this hour. "Haven't you slept?" Pei Chichi hugged his neck, buried her face in his neck, and let him take off her pajamas. Just like that, she nestled in his arms. Tang Yu nodded and carefully dried her body with a towel. He wanted to help her put on her pajamas, but the little girl hugged him tightly and refused to wear them. "Chichi." Tang Yu's voice was hoarse, and her palm was a little hot. Pei Chichi hugged him and said in a low voice, "Tang Yu, I want you to hug me." He patted her helplessly. "Chichi, I'm hugging you, aren't I?" She rubbed her little face against his neck desperately. After a while, she raised her little face, her long hair was loose, and there was a little sweat on her face and shoulders. Her little face was still red because of the high fever, and she looked very attractive. "Be good, I won't hurt you." Tang Yu's voice was trembling. However, the little fellow in his arms moved her little mouth to his and kissed his lips. She sat in his arms like that, tender and tender. It was a temptation that no man could resist. Tang Yu was in a dilemma. His body was in pain, and he desperately wanted her, but his rational mind told him that he couldn't. She kissed him carelessly and tugged at his belt. He clearly did that. Tang Yu felt like he was sitting in a ball of fire in his arms. "Tang Yu." She bit his lips and begged softly. He felt that his heart was about to melt. How could he be rational? He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. When she was sick, he did not dare to indulge himself and only came once. When it was over, he kissed the little person in his arms contentedly, and she had already fainted. He felt heartache, guilt, and satisfaction at the same time. Early in the morning, when Pei Chichi woke up, the morning light shone through the window and warmed her body. She reached out and touched the side of her pillow. Chapter 10:28. The sun shone on her little face, and the fine fluff was like a small brush brushing across Pei Chichi's heart. At that moment, her uneasy heart was comforted, and the darkness brought by Shen Lian was washed away. Pei Chichi smiled at Xiaoxin and said in a low voice, "Who brought Xiaoxin here?" Xiaoxin's chubby little hand supported her little head, and her voice was sweet and crisp, "I came in Ku's car." "Tang Yu." Pei Chichi looked around, but didn't see Tang Yu. "Kuj is making breakfast." The little fatty came over and got into Pei Chichi's arms greedily. Pei Chichi deliberately didn't stop it. After a while, the little hand quietly unbuttoned her shirt, and then there was a familiar. She closed her eyes and stroked the little fatty. "Xiaoxin, you've grown up." Xiaoxin didn't care, and her little hand held the bottle, and she had a craving. When Tang Yu entered the room, he saw such a scene. Her pajamas were slightly open, and her fair shoulders were half naked. She looked a little seductive, and there was a little thing in her arms. It was many times more seductive than when she was fully exposed. To be honest, Tang Yu was a little regretful. He shouldn't have brought Xiaoxin over. Otherwise, the person eating in her arms right now would be him. Pei Chichi looked at him and was a little embarrassed. She pulled Xiaoxin out of her arms and gathered her pajamas. "Why did you pick up the little one so early in the morning?" "I thought you wanted to see her." Tang Yu's tone had a hint of a smile, and he reached out to put her tray on the table. He walked over and hugged both of them, one big and one small. He lowered his head and kissed their foreheads, and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Baby, get up and eat." Pei Chichi blushed, and she got out of his arms and went into the bathroom. Xiaoxin was left to be held high by Kuj. Tang Yu held Xiaoxin, and his expression was a little complicated. Xiaoxin still called him brother. What should he do? Although the little guy was young, he already had his own ideas. Mr. Tang was having a headache. Pei Chichi came out and changed into a set of home clothes. She felt much more energetic. I feel so useless. She thought of how she was scared by Shen Lian and stuck out her tongue. Tang Yu helped her sit down and ate her breakfast. Our Chichi is very capable. Pei Chichi was drinking milk. When she heard what he said, she understood what he meant. She stared at him with her eyes wide open and then spat it out. Xiaoshen looked at her anxiously. Why was it that this older sister was even more disobedient than her when eating? Thus, he carefully picked up a small fork, as if he was playing with little Zhao Yang. Spank your little butt. Kuj, spank my butt. Pei Chichi was dumbfounded as she stared at Xiaoshen. But in Xiaoshen's mind, she should spank her little, but if she did something wrong. Tang Yu looked at Pei Chichi and smiled. Chichi, come over here to brother. She stared at him. Xiaoshen was being mischievous, and he was being mischievous too. But she did not know that he was recalling the situation that night, and his heart was moved. In the end, she was still caught by him. He pressed her down with his big palm and looked at Xiaoshen. If Kuj spank her, should Xiaoshen hit her hard or gently? Xiaoshen was in a dilemma. She looked at Pei Chichi, and then looked at Tang Yu. Kuj, hit her hard and then hit her gently. Pei Chichi lay on his thighs and cried out. You can't do this. Chapter 10:29. His palm hit her hard, and she moaned. The sound was trembling, and it was indescribably pitiful and alluring. Then, he patted her lightly, and did not pick it up again after it landed on her butt. Instead, he rubbed it for her soothingly, until she trembled. Tang Yu. She called his name softly. Xiaoshen was still worried that he would lead the children astray by doing this. Xiaoshen's eyes widened as she watched Kuj and her sister playing a game. Why did her sister look so happy, yet unhappy at the same time? Why was her sister crying? Did it hurt a lot? Xiaoshen crawled over and onto Tang Yu's lap. Then, Xiaoshen raised her little butt. Kuj, hit me. Hit Xiaoshen, don't hit me anymore. Xiaoshen said with all her might. Her adorable look made Tang Yu not know whether to laugh or cry. He reached out and patted her little butt lightly. Done. Xiaoshen whimpered and waited for Kuj to continue, just like how he did with her sister. But Xiaoshen did not get it even after waiting for a long time. Xiaoshen was very puzzled. It did not hurt at all. Kuj was biased. Pei Chichi jumped down and ran to the bathroom to wash her face. She looked at her red face in the mirror. Tang Yu was too despicable. He treated her like that in front of Xiaoshen. She was wearing a casual dress. He used one hand to hit her, and the other hand had already reached inside. When he was hitting Xiaoshen, he used one hand to torment her. Pei Chichi had never thought that Tang Yu was such a shameless man, but he was just that shameless now. Shameless, shameless to the extreme. Behind her, there was another figure. Then, he hugged her from behind. Tang Yu's voice was extremely hoarse. Chichi. His large palm was placed on her lower abdomen. Pei Chichi was afraid that he would do something reckless, so she quickly grabbed his hand. Her eyes met his in the mirror. Her gaze was seductive. Tang Yu, your heart is out there. Don't mess around. Tang Yu's face rested on her thin shoulder and his voice was low. Chichi, do you want me to act recklessly when I'm not careful? She clearly didn't mean it that way. Pei Chichi glared at him in the mirror. Tang Yu smiled and suddenly held her hand. He put his face against hers and looked at her in the mirror. Miss Pei, when will you be Mrs. Tang again? She straightened up and stared at him. His expression was serious. Pei Chichi's breathing suddenly became chaotic, and her chest heaved up and down violently. Tang Yu. He smiled, and a ring appeared in his hand out of nowhere. He slowly slipped it onto her fair ring finger. Pei Chichi looked down at the ring. It was not eye-catching, just a circle of platinum. I took it from Grandpa. It's just right. Tang Yu kissed her cheek. Chichi, let's get married, shall we? Her face was a little red, and she played with the ring. After a long time, she said, Tang Yu, we're already married. He turned her around and pressed down on her shoulders, saying in a low voice, Miss Pei, we're living together illegally. She glared at him. Tang Yu pinched her little face. How about the wedding be set in a month? She glared at him. I'll only get married if Xiaoshan calls me mommy. Mr. Tang felt a headache coming on. The child was still young. Could he change it all at once? If you can't, then don't get married, Pei Chichi said willfully. Mr. Tang can also marry your Xiao Qi. Chapter 1030. Just as he was about to say something, Xiaoshan jumped in and called out to Sister Kuj, saying that the doctor was here. I want to poke your little butt. Xiaoshan smiled wickedly, revealing a row of sharp teeth. Chichi was heartbreaking. Tang Yu threw her a mocking look, then carried her to the living room. Chichi, go and poke your little butt. She pinched him discreetly. Dr. Lin was already waiting. He carefully examined her again and made sure that she was fine. He straightened up and smiled. It was a high fever caused by fear, but it should be fine now. You have to be careful not to get agitated again. The doctor's heart was in a mess. He saw that there was an obvious hickey on Pei Chichi's neck. He looked at Tang Yu meaningfully. He didn't even let a patient go. Tang Yu asked the maid to send the doctor out. He turned back to look at Pei Chichi and smiled. Are you feeling better? She lay on the bed and complained. Tang Yu, Dr. Lin must have seen through it. Now that she had recovered, he wanted to tease her a little. He walked over to the bed and placed the little fellow on his lap. Chichi, what can Dr. Lin tell? He asked with a smile. What can you tell me? Her face was resting on his thighs. Her face was buried in his thighs. It was warm. He knew it all along, but he pretended not to know. Pei Chichi lowered her head and kissed him. She sounded a little angry. Tang Yu, you're a jerk. He chuckled and hugged her. There was an indescribable warmth in his voice. You wanted it. Chichi, don't you remember? You hugged me and begged me. He lowered his head and whispered in her ear. Pei Chichi couldn't bear to listen to him. Tang Yu realized that Chichi loved hugs when she was weak. He reached out and touched her little face. All right, rest at home for a few days before going back to work. He had touched her nerve. Pei Chichi thought of Jin Taihe. That was the place where Shen Lian had stayed. Her body tensed up, and he could feel it clearly. Even though his heart ached for her, he still said firmly, Chichi, you can't let yourself live in guilt because of Tang Xin. She's your sister, and at the same time, you're the closest person to her. Pei Chichi pursed her lips and said softly, Tang Yu, I know. Tang Yu reached out and touched her little face. I know our Chichi is the bravest. She lay on his lap and didn't move. Her voice was also very gentle. Tang Yu, I really want to stay like this forever. He smiled and touched her little head. Silly girl, you don't want to be careful? Of course I want to be careful, Pei Chichi said. She thought of the little person and looked around. Only then did she realize that the little person was gone. Tang Yu leaned against her neck. He was brought downstairs to play. She struggled to get up but was pressed down by him again. She felt her neck being bitten by him again. Tang Yu, are you a vampire? She snorted and wanted to push him away. Tang Yu hugged her in his arms and didn't do anything. He just hugged her and said with a smile, Chichi, capitalists suck blood. She raised her little face and bit his neck, then another bite. Tang Yu let her do whatever she wanted. His heart was full of happiness. His Chichi had always been the best and most suitable one for him. Chapter 1031. Pei Huan called Pei Chichi. Tang Yu picked up and said that Pei Chichi had a fever. Originally, Pei Huan wanted to go see Pei Chichi, but she was pregnant and was about to give birth. It was inconvenient, so she could only wait at home for news. As she waited, she forgot that she was going to be admitted to the hospital. At night, it started to rain. The sound of the rain hitting the window was like falling bamboo beans. Pei Huan stood by the window and looked at it, wearing a nightgown. Still awake. Little Mai came in with a cup of milk, closed the door, and walked over to pass the milk to Pei Huan. Pei Huan took the milk. The temperature was just right. It was just like the care that Little Mai usually gave her. Pei Huan's voice was a little low. Little Mai, thank you. Little Mai smiled. What are you thanking me for? Pei Huan looked at her and said emotionally, a lot. Anyway, thank you, Little Mai. Drink the milk, drink it and sleep. Little Mai urged her, but her voice was very gentle. Pei Huan was touched and her eyes were a little hot. After a while, she said softly, Little Mai, don't you feel pity? Pity what? Little Mai smiled and stood with her, looking at the boundless night. Ever since Khan Mingzhu was no longer standing guard in front, Pei Huan had developed a habit of standing here. Pei Huan pursed her lips. A manager would think of a way to leave an artist like me. Little Mai, why didn't you? Little Mai smiled, actually, I don't have that much ambition. I just follow the heavenly king and queen, and I'm still a manager. It's just that I'm a little more impressive in front of others. Maybe it's not as comfortable as it is now, but at least I can sleep until dawn. This was all thanks to the pregnant woman. Pei Huan looked at Little Mai. Not good, you've been infected by me. Maybe this is my nature. It was rare for Little Mai to joke with her. Actually, what she said was true. Living a quiet life like this was not lonely at all. Instead, it was relaxing. Pei Huan drank the milk and handed the cup to Little Mai. She said, if I'm not in king anymore, Little Mai, come and be my financial advisor. Little Mai smiled. I can guarantee that I will become your and the child's nanny. She raised her head. Heavens. I still want to fall in love and get married. I don't want to be a nanny so soon. I'll give you a holiday. You'll work 4 days a week. Pei Huan sincerely wanted her to stay. Little Mai looked at her and sighed. Pei Huan, you should find your own happiness. She could tell that Pei Huan was still thinking about Khan Mingzhu in his heart, but he refused to admit it. The feeling of wanting to get close to old Khan but refusing to forgive him was not a good feeling, because Pei Huan could not find a reason to forgive old Khan. Pei Huan pursed her lips, looking disinterested. Let's talk about it later. Xiao Mai smiled and did not force her. She supported Pei Huan, who was pregnant, to the side of the bed and lay down. As she covered Pei Huan with a blanket, she seemed to have thought of something. I'll arrange for you to be admitted to the hospital tomorrow. With such a big belly, it looks like it will rain for a week. If you suddenly have to give birth, as Lil Mai spoke, she suddenly paused and looked at Pei Huan. Pei Huan bit her lips and frowned. It looks like she's about to give birth. She looked at Xiao Mai. Little Mai was also a young lady. She had never seen it before. You look at me, I look at you. In the end, Little Mai was the one who bravely lifted the blanket to take a look. Chapter 1032. Pei Huan was about to cry. It was the middle of the night and it was raining. Little Mai was even more speechless. She was such a jinx. I'll call Miss Pei. Little Mai picked up her phone, but Pei Huan stopped her. She gritted her teeth and said, no, she's sick. Little Mai still listened to her, but if Pei Chichi didn't come, she could only call 120. She didn't know if such a heavy rain would come. At this moment, Pei Huan couldn't help but cry out because of the pain. Her cry was quite shrill. Little Mai panicked and quickly called 120. When the other party heard that it was childbirth, they immediately said that it wasn't their responsibility. Little Mai was so angry that she wanted to curse. At this moment, there was a loud sound downstairs, like the sound of a door lock being twisted open. Little Mai was shocked. Then, there was the sound of hurried footsteps on the stairs. The bedroom door was pushed open, and old Khan stood at the door. Little Mai was stunned and murmured, I thought it was a thief. However, old Khan had appeared like a deity. Pei Huan began to feel pain, and the excessive pain made her a little dazed. She seemed to see old Khan in front of her. She couldn't believe it, but old Khan really did appear. She cried out in pain. Old Khan looked at her, still in a daze. Are you going to give birth? Seeing him like this, Little Mai kicked him from behind. What time is it? Hurry up and send her to the hospital. Old Khan wiped the water off his face and immediately went forward to carry Pei Huan, but he stopped himself. After thinking about it, he took off his clothes and wiped them with a towel. In the cold spring weather, he wrapped Pei Huan tightly, but he walked outside bare-chested, and Little Mai followed him with an umbrella. Pei Huan was a little weak after the period. She looked up at old Khan's face in a daze. Although his face had grown a big beard again, she could see that he had lost a lot of weight. Even his eye sockets were a little sunken. Pei Huan's fingers gently touched his face. She didn't say a word, but her eyes were lingering. Save your strength. You still have to work hard to give birth to our baby later. Old Khan gently placed her in the car and asked Little Mai to support her. Pei Huan was in pain again. Her forehead was drenched in sweat. She swallowed her saliva in pain and let out a long cry. Khan Mingzhu, the child is mine. Now whatever she said was right. Even if she wanted the moon and the stars in the sky, Laro Khan would pluck them for her. He turned on the windshield wipers and started the car slowly. He said in a low voice, Huan Huan, bear with it. I'm driving slowly. The spring rain was heavy, and it was foggy at night, so visibility was extremely low. For the sake of safety, he didn't dare to drive too fast. Pei Huan sat in the backseat and howled, Khan Mingzhu, you did it on purpose. You bastard, you're clearly trying to hurt me to death. Chapter 1033. Xiaomai was worried, but she couldn't help but laugh. This couple was really melodramatic. There was no one else. In Xiaomai's opinion, Pei Huan was the most suitable person for old Khan. Although Pei Huan thought she was smart, she was actually a very silly girl. She was a perfect match for a man like old Khan. As for sumo, Xiaomai had been in the industry for several years. She knew sumo's tricks. Old Khan wouldn't be happy with a woman like her. Pei Huan's pain was getting more and more obvious. She was already a delicate girl, and she was crying. When they reached the hospital, the elevator broke down. It was the 20th floor. Old Khan carried her up one floor at a time. When they reached the 20th floor, his arms were about to break, and his legs were trembling. Because it was a natural birth, only one member of the family was allowed in. In the end, old Khan went in. He wore the sterilized clothes provided by the hospital. He was too big to buckle up, so he could only leave them open. Pei Huan grabbed old Khan's arm, gasped in pain and screamed. The nurse had never seen a man who could make him squint and scream like this. She rolled her eyes a few times, but Pei Huan screamed even louder. The nurse was really annoyed by her high-pitched screams. She snorted. Did you scream like this when you were happy? He squinted. Pei Huan opened her eyes and glared at the nurse. How dare he provoke her like this when she was pregnant? Pei Huan screamed even louder. She grabbed old Khan's Xiong fur with her two little claws and pulled hard. The doctors and nurses who delivered the baby were all stunned by his narrowed eyes. He was grabbing a handful of Xiong's fur. However, old Khan acted as if he had scratched an itch on his body. He coaxed his little baby without a change in expression. Be a good girl. Don't cry. You can scream as much as you want. He then glared at the nurse. The nurse was shocked. The strong man in front of her had arms thicker than her thighs. He could probably snap her in half. She didn't dare to glare at Pei Huan anymore. The man in front of her was too fierce. However, old Khan was extremely gentle to Pei Huan. He let Pei Huan pull out all his Xiong fur. That wasn't all. He put his hand on his belt. Huan Huan, don't pull anymore. What the fuck? The nurse was about to vomit. Who gave birth like this? No matter how melodramatic it was, Pei Huan's child was born. It took a full 4 hours. It was a son. Old Khan was a straight man. When he hugged his son, he was so emotional that he cried. He kissed the child's mother gently. Huan Huan, you've given birth to a son for our old Khan family. Pei Huan was still in good spirits. After getting up and drinking half a bowl of nourishing soup, she became even more energetic. My son is mine. It has nothing to do with your old Khan family. Chapter 1034. Pei Huan snorted. Who wants to see it? Old Khan hugged the child and didn't know how to coax him. Little Mai watched and knew what to do. She quietly retreated. Old Khan's skin thickened after everyone was gone. At that moment, his son started crying. This kid must be hungry. Let's ask Mommy for food. Old Khan, who had only become a father at the age of 38, coaxed his son. He gently placed the child in Pei Huan's arms and looked at her. I'm hungry. Pei Huan ignored him. She held her son in her arms and carefully unbuttoned her shirt. That little thing was born with a natural instinct. It immediately gobbled it up and swallowed it in big mouthfuls. That voice and that erotic scene made Laro Khan's eyes turn green, emitting a glossy green light. He looked at her eagerly. He swallowed his saliva. He would rather be a tortoise now. At least he would have milk to drink. God knew how long it had been since he last touched a woman. He hadn't touched his Huan Huan. When he was with Sumo, Sumo tried to seduce him a few times. She even took off her sexy pajamas right in front of him, but he didn't waver at all. He didn't even bat an eyelid. He was an experienced man, and he didn't even flinch. To be honest, Pei Huan was really not good-looking now. Women who had just given birth were always a little haggard, but her whole body had a kind of maternal brilliance, which was very charming. Old Khan was an artist and he knew that she was touched. Because he was touched, he felt that she was extremely attractive and even desired her. The little person in Pei Huan's arms ate with all its might. After finishing one, it quickly raised its bin-like eyes and looked at Pei Huan eagerly. Pei Huan looked at the wrinkled face and liked it a lot. Then, she changed her position. Old Khan's eyes glowed even more when she changed her position. He wanted to swallow her whole. Pei Huan looked at her son with satisfaction. But after looking at him for a while, she wasn't satisfied anymore. Because this son looked like Khan Mingzhu. He was just born, but the hair on his cheeks was already obvious. He would definitely grow a beard when he grew up. Pei Huan looked up and glared at Old Khan. She didn't feel good. Old Khan wanted to cry. Did he offend this young madam again? After Pei Huan fed her son, she said in a low voice, Khan Mingzhu, give your son a name. Old Khan's heart skipped a beat. He squatted down piously and looked at his wife and child with gentle eyes. He asked carefully, what's their surname? He did not dare to use the surname Khan on his own, or she would be angry again. Pei Huan said unhappily, if I tell you to get up, then get up. Why do you have so much nonsense to say? Old Khan was overjoyed. He simply could not believe it. Was she really letting him get up? What do you think of Khan Xing? Old Khan felt that he was a pearl and his son was a star. They were quite compatible. Pei Huan didn't say anything, so Old Khan couldn't figure out if this lady liked him or not. He was very anxious. Pei Huan looked at him and snorted. If your surname is Khan, it's better to call you Khan Das Han. Old Khan swallowed hard. He could sacrifice his son for his wife. The bearded man's facial muscles trembled as he smiled. That's a good name. What a good name. Pei Huan couldn't help but roll her eyes. Silly. Chapter 1035. It was during this quiet moment that they were thinking about something. Was it time for them to be together? She had forgiven him, and he could finally walk out of Sumo's life and be with her without any worries. He told her everything about the past. From now on, there was only his wife and child in the world. Huan Huan, let's be together again. Old Khan walked up and brushed aside her messy hair. If you don't want to, I won't force you or make you angry. He was so humble and pitiful just to stay by her side. Pei Huan felt a little sad. Actually, she was the one who forced her way into his life. He wasn't ready to love her wholeheartedly, but she had already taken him seriously back then. Pei Huan said in a low voice, Khan Mingzhu, are you ready now? Old Khan's voice was so gentle that even he couldn't believe it. Huan Huan, yes, I'm ready. He had let her down 1,000 times, but he didn't say it. If he did, it would only make her sad and make her cry. Women in confinement shouldn't cry. But even so, Pei Huan still cried. She looked at him with her eyes closed. Khan Mingzhu, I don't know why I like you when you're so old, ugly, and poor. As she spoke, she cried out the grievances she had suffered for the past 6 months. She was also a woman, and she didn't want to have a child out of wedlock. He was too despicable. Khan Mingzhu, I will never forgive you, Pei Huan said angrily. Old Khan smiled. All right, my Xiong's hair is yours for the rest of my life. Why would I want your Xiong's hair? Pei Huan wiped her tears. I want money for the milk powder. Old Khan's eyes were gentle. After searching for a long time, he took out a bank card from his pocket and placed it in her palm. There's 5 million in here, money for the milk powder. Pei Huan knew that he had used almost all his money to buy a house. This year, he had earned 5 million. He must have worked hard to earn it, right? She didn't know why, but she felt like crying. Khan Mingzhu had given his love to Su Mo, but he had given his essence and all his money to her. Pei Huan considered herself a vulgar person. She felt that money was the most intuitive expression of a man's feelings. However, she was still a little worried. She glared at him and asked, "Did your Su Mo sleep with you?" Old Khan was especially honest. "I used to." After giving birth, Pei Huan was full of energy and vigor, which was rare. She roared, "I'm talking about, after you get together with me." Old Khan rubbed his hands and said firmly, "Of course not." Pei Huan stared at his bearded face. Actually, she couldn't see anything, because other than his eyes, everything else was bearded. After a while, she waved her hand and said, "Forget it. Let's call him Enchanting." Old Khan could hardly believe it. God, she forgave him. She forgave him. At this moment, he really wanted to hug her, but after such a long time, he actually felt a little timid. Pei Huan blinked and pouted. "Khan Mingzhu, it hurts. Giving birth is so painful. This dead man, he actually didn't come to comfort her. Did he really think that she was a female warrior?" Old Khan's breathing became lighter. Then, he gently placed the child on the small bed, bent over, and lifted the blanket. He couldn't wait to eat his son's food. At this moment, the nurse pushed the door open and saw this scene. Chapter 1036. Old Khan swallowed another mouthful of saliva, then released it reluctantly. The nurse was embarrassed. She had been an obstetrics nurse for 3 or 4 years, but this was the first time she had seen such a scene. This couple was so loving. Old Khan licked his lips, feeling satisfied but not satisfied physically as he stood up. The nurse checked Pei Huan's body and recorded everything. When she reached a certain point, the nurse paused and then said meaningfully, "The milk has opened, and the method is for the husband to suck." Even someone as thick-skinned as Pei Huan blushed and glared daggers at Old Khan. Old Khan scratched his head and chuckled. Then, he went to hug his son. "Dad is willing to do anything for our Khan Xing. How shameless could he be?" The nurse rolled her eyes. Watching Old Khan kiss the baby, she couldn't help but say, "Sir, newborns are very fragile. Your lips may have bacteria, which may infect the newborn." Old Khan was still kissing his son and said casually, "My son takes after me. He's strong. Besides, we were just having dinner together. Isn't that right, little Khan Xing?" The nurse was stunned. Pei Huan couldn't help but yell at him, "Khan Mingzhu, put down our son." Old Khan looked at her pitifully, but he put down his son obediently. The nurse burst into laughter. "The patient is in good spirits." Putting away the records, she said seriously, "Anyway, you can't have sex for 42 days. You have to wait until the test is confirmed, understand?" Pei Huan nodded, blushing. Old Khan touched his nose. "I've been abstinent for almost 10 months. In any case, Old Khan and Pei Huan had reconciled. Xiaomai was happy for them and couldn't wait to call Pei Chichi early in the morning. Pei Chichi was shocked. She had given birth after only 1 night of no contact. She hurriedly broke free from Tang Yu and ran into the changing room to change her clothes, like a whirlwind. Tang Yu followed her and picked out a bright yellow dress for her. He carried her onto Xiao Shou's lap and helped her put it on. He scolded, "You're already so big, yet you're still so careless." He was referring to the time when she ran around without shoes. Pei Chichi also lowered her head and looked at her own feet. Then, she hugged Tang Yu, not caring if she was half-dressed or not. Her little hand hung around his neck as she looked at him tenderly. Her voice was also sweet. Pei Huan gave birth to a son. "You're walking barefoot just because of this?" He patted her but disapprovingly, then leaned over to her ear and said in a low voice, "The next time I find out, I'll punish you the same way I punish you." She raised her head and looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. He smiled. "All right, put on your clothes and I'll send you there. But Chichi, have you thought about what to give him?" Although he didn't like Pei Huan, it was fine as long as Chichi liked him. Pei Chichi let him put on her clothes as she tried hard to think. A house? Pei Chichi looked at Tang Yu and asked seriously. Tang Yu patted her little head. "Very good, this is very upstart. You bought me for 100 million. Pei Chichi, who was being mocked, jumped up and hugged his waist. Tang Yu laughed. "This is different." Chapter 1037. Tang Yu curled his lips and looked at his little fellow. "This is probably the only time in a lifetime. Because no other girl would be so bold as to seduce me when I'm drunk." Pei Chichi punched him angrily. Her whole body hung on his body, and she lowered her head to bite his shoulder. He was only wearing a bathrobe. If they were to play like this, his bathrobe would be open soon. It wouldn't be able to cover anything. Pei Chichi covered her eyes and said coquettishly, "Tang Yu, put on your clothes." He smiled and kissed her. He pulled her hand away and kissed her eyes. Pei Chichi screamed and struggled to escape. She kept clinging to him and pushed her against the closet. At this moment, Pei Chichi's long black hair was draped over her thin shoulders. The dress he had picked for her was long gone. She was practically sitting on him and could feel his change. His clear eyes were filled with some kind of intention. Pei Chichi became rascally. She wrapped her little hands around his neck and said coquettishly, "We agreed to see Pei Huan and the child." He leaned forward and kissed her ear, murmuring, "Then we'll just do it once." With that said, he started to move. Pei Chichi screamed and hugged him tightly like a little lamb. "Tang Yu, hurry up. Hurry up." The man who was already behaving like a beast in the morning raised his brows. Then, as she wished, "Hurry up. And hurry up." Pei Chichi screamed again and again, her voice trembling. "Tang Yu, I didn't mean that. Hurry up." He nibbled her little ear and teased her. "Which one are you talking about then? Chichi, Chem? I just want it to be faster." She bit her lip and looked at him pitifully with tears in her eyes. "I just want to end it earlier." Tang Yu chuckled. "It might be difficult. Chichi, you might be able to say something nice." Pei Chichi looked at him resentfully before hugging him. She whispered in his ear, praising how amazing he was. She called him Big Brother and Daddy in a soft voice. She thought that he would let her go. But the more she behaved like this, the hotter Tang Yu felt and the more he lashed out at her. Pei Chichi angrily punched him, bit him, and scolded him with all kinds of nasty words. Tang Yu carried her into the bedroom and threw her onto the luxurious bed. He knelt in front of her and propped himself up on both sides of her body. He stared at her with his dark eyes and curled his lips. "Pei Chichi, you're dead meat." She screamed and closed her eyes. Then she turned her little face to the side helplessly. "Tang Yu, you're bad." His heart softened and he kissed her little mouth. "All right, I'll let you go." She opened her eyes and looked at him. His eyes were full of tenderness. Pei Chichi was a little hesitant again. She hooked her little foot around him and bit her little finger. "What about you?" "I'll settle it myself." It was rare for him to be so hoarse. Just as he was about to get off the bed, she hugged him and refused to let him go. "Chichi." He patted her little hand helplessly. Pei Chichi's little face was red. She hugged him and leaned down. She pressed her little face against his lower abdomen and said in a very low voice, "I'll help you." Tang Yu could not believe his good luck. He suppressed the throbbing of his body and stared at her. Pei Chichi raised her little face and looked at him sadly. "Go and wash up." Tang Yu was ecstatic. He felt that today was a good day. He quickly went to the bathroom to wash up and came back to lie down. Mr. Tang was very satisfied with this morning. Chapter 1038. Tang Yu was satisfied. He had enjoyed it today, but he hadn't let her go in the end. He couldn't help feeling a burst of passion when he thought of how she had begged him in a soft voice. Pei Chichi ignored him along the way. It wasn't until he drove the car to a law firm that she was stunned. She looked at him and said, "We're going to the hospital." "What are we doing here?" Tang Yu unbuckled his seat belt and explained, "Didn't you say you were going to give me a gift?" He turned his head and smiled, then got out of the car. There was already a lawyer waiting in the law firm. He handed a document to Tang Yu. Tang Yu got into the car quickly and put the document on Pei Chichi's lap. He buckled his seat belt and started the car. Pei Chichi opened the document in surprise. After reading it, she smiled and said, "It's indeed a big gift." She had already returned Bo Yi's shares to Tang Yu, returning them to their rightful owner. However, she hadn't expected that Tang Yu would give Pei Huan 1% of the shares. 1% was worth billions of yuan. How generous. Pei Chichi didn't have any objections. She put the document away and heard Tang Yu say softly, "Not only for Pei Huan's child, but also for Khan Mingzhu." That year, Khan Mingzhu had brought Chichi out of the darkness, and he was very grateful. Pei Chichi smiled. "He already has the best gift." She paused for a moment and said, "They've made up. I went to bed early last night and Pei Huan was about to give birth. Old Khan sent her to the hospital." She stretched lazily and her expression was especially gentle. "I'm really grateful for this rain. I'm grateful that I got sick." Tang Yu reached out and touched her hair. "Silly child." Pei Chichi also smiled, and there was a strange light in her eyes. She pressed her little face against his arm and said in a low voice, "Tang Yu, I feel so good now." His heart softened. He didn't say anything and just let her lean on him. When he arrived at the hospital, he saw Pei Huan, Laro Khan, and Khan Xing. Seeing them together again, Pei Chichi's eyes were a little hot. This was what she wanted very much, but she didn't dare to tell Pei Huan. It was really good now. When old Khan saw the gift for his son's birth, he was shocked. He said that it was too expensive and refused to accept it. Pei Huan said calmly, "Take it. As long as it's from Chichi, you can accept it." Pei Chichi smiled. "It's Tang Yu's idea." Pei Huan was about to explode. It was Tang Yu's intention. The corner of her mouth twitched a little because she felt a little uncomfortable. She had seduced Tang Yu in the past. Pei Chichi ruffled her hair. "Look, you're being silly again. Didn't you say that the past is in the past?" Tears welled up in Pei Huan's eyes. Pei Chichi couldn't help but pat her. "Don't cry." Laro Khan hurried over like an old mother. Finally, after coaxing the noble lady, he could finally hold his baby for everyone to admire. Laro Khan asked happily, "How is it? Can I look at it?" "It's very handsome," Pei Chichi said against her will. Because newborn babies were all wrinkled, only Laro Khan thought it was good-looking. Old Khan's heart was filled with joy, and he was extremely satisfied. Pei Huan was the only one who didn't say anything. "It's obviously like you. It's not good-looking at all." Laro Khan was deeply shocked. He was afraid that the newborn child could understand. His IQ was 0 at this time, so he quickly coaxed the child. "Mom is just talking nonsense. Our Khan Xing is the most handsome and good-looking." Pei Chichi frowned and suddenly said something surprising. "Pei Huan, your son's name." Chapter 1039. What's wrong with the name? Pei Huan's gaze fell on old Khan. She thought to herself, how could a newborn kid be so amused? Pei Chichi held back her laughter. "Your son's name. Khan Xing and Maro Xing. Why do they sound so similar?" Even Tang Yu's lips curled up slightly as he reached out to stroke Chichi's hair. "Stop pulling." But Pei Huan was furious. She used to be ridiculed by the media because she didn't have any works on the red carpet. How dare Laro Khan make such a name? "Khan Mingzhu, you must have done it on purpose." Pei Huan roared. If she could get out of bed, she would have torn Laro Khan apart. Laro Khan looked at Pei Chichi sadly. "I didn't mean that." Pei Huan cried, "That's what you meant. Khan Mingzhu, I almost fell into your trap. You're going to use my son's name to laugh at me for not having any works for the rest of my life. Isn't our Khan Xing your work? Old Khan thought that this was a very good line of love, but Pei Huan cried out again, "You still dare to say blanket star? How dare you? Khan Mingzhu, I'm going to kill you." Pei Chichi and Tang Yu couldn't stop laughing. Pei Chichi quietly nudged Tang Yu and whispered, "Look, isn't she becoming more and more like Ju Mailin?" Tang Yu was a man and a noble man, so he wouldn't easily comment on a woman. He just smiled and reached out to pinch her little face. "Naughty." Pei Chichi hugged his arm and said coquettishly, "I'm doing it for Pei Huan's sake. I can't only find out when I'm 50 or 60 years old. How bad does Maroshing sound?" She looked up and smiled coquettishly. Tang Yu's heart was like a spring breeze. However, what happened next made Laro Khan feel depressed. When Lin Jinrong went to the hospital for a follow-up, he met Xiao Mai and found out that Pei Huan had given birth. Out of politeness, Lin Jinrong asked his secretary to bring a bouquet of lilies and a piece of mutton-fat white jade, which was quite expensive. Old Khan was a tough man, but now he was as narrow-minded as a needle. He stared at Pei Huan eagerly. Pei Huan asked little Mai to send 2 sets of happy eggs to Lin Jinrong's secretary. After she left, she picked up the bouquet of flowers and took a deep sniff. "It smells so good, little Mai help me arrange it." Old Khan was very dissatisfied. "This flower is plain and doesn't look happy at all. It won't look good in the delivery room." Xiao Mai smiled. "Lily is a sedative." Pei Huan wanted to provoke Laro Khan. She looked at him and said, "He doesn't have any aesthetic sense." Old Khan was unconvinced. "I'm a cameraman. But you still have no sense of beauty. Otherwise, why would you fall for an old woman like Sumo?" This was Pei Huan's little idea, but she was not stupid enough to say it out loud. Old Khan stiffened his neck. In the end, he softened. "Fine, fine, fine. If you think it's good, then stay." Old Khan did not have the right to speak. He wiped away his tears in his heart. He had no status now. It was already a blessing for him to be able to be a nanny. After the 2 men went out for a smoke, Pei Chichi finally had a chance to talk to Pei Huan. She sat by the bed and covered Pei Huan with the blanket. Pei Huan looked blissful as she let go. "Have you made up your mind?" Pei Chichi looked at her. Pei Huan nodded. "Yes, Chichi. I've made up my mind." Pei Chichi smiled. "Since you've made up your mind, then live a good life. Old Khan is a good person." Pei Chichi held back her laughter as she opened the car door and got into the car. Tang Yu was stunned. Then, he shook his head and got into the car as well. He buckled his seatbelt slowly and looked at the little girl with an indescribable satisfaction in his heart. At that moment, his Chichi was like an ordinary girl. He suddenly said, "Chichi, do you want to continue going to school?" Pei Chichi was stunned for a moment. Then, she felt a little emotional as she recalled that she did not get her graduation certificate from B University. She felt as though she had been in a different world. After a while, she said softly, "We'll talk about it in the future." Tang Yu saw that she looked a little sad and knew that she was thinking about the unhappy past. He smiled faintly. "That's true. Miss Pei's most important task in life is to propose to Mr. Tang." "Tang Yu." She called his name angrily. Tang Yu had already started the car. "Isn't it?" Chapter 1041. As the days passed, Pei Huan was discharged from the hospital and lived a simple life with Laro Khan. Tang Yu took over Boyi easily, but Pei Chichi was so busy that her feet barely touched the ground. Other than her personal ability, it was also because Shen Lian had made a mess of Jin Taihe. Pei Chichi was busy for a month before she could sort out some clues. When she took over, Xiaowen followed her. Xiaowen was a capable assistant and helped a lot. After a month, Pei Chichi felt like a dead dog. It was a rare Sunday morning. She lay in Tang Yu's arms and felt that his big palm was a little restless. She knew him well. Her little hand reached under the quilt and grabbed him. Her voice was muffled. "Tang Yu, no. I'm so tired." She said it pitifully, hoping that he would let her go. Tang Yu patted her and held her with one hand. He propped his body up a little and leaned against the headboard. He pinched her little face. On Friday, you said it was Saturday. On Saturday, you said it was this morning. Pei Chichi, I haven't had sex for 5 days. Beast. Her hair was messy like a little lunatic. Her little face was buried in his arms and her hands were hugging his waist. Her voice was muffled. Tang Yu, I'm so tired. He grabbed her little head and lowered his head to kiss her. Pei Chichi dodged him and screamed with all her might. No. The more she struggled, the more beastly he became. He held her slender little arm and dragged her into his arms. He bit her little ear. I want it now. Chichi, you can't escape. She bit her lip and obediently raised her little face to let him kiss her. Seeing how obedient she was, he impolitely kissed her. With one hand on her little head, he used the other to push aside the messy hair on her face. He kissed her deeply. Their lips and teeth entangled. His kiss was too deep. She could only swallow and breathe with difficulty with him. Her tender little body sat in his arms. She could feel the strength of him. It was as if he could tear her apart at any time. Tang Yu, I'm afraid. Her voice was broken. Be good, I will be gentle. He coaxed her and was about to do it with her. The door opened with a bang, and a childish voice rang out. Kuj. Xiaoshan was wearing a milky white lace dress, staring at Kuj and her sister with her mouth agape. Why aren't they wearing clothes? Next to little Xiaoshan was little Zhao Yang, dressed like a little gentleman, looking very arrogant. Little Xiaoshan's mouth turned into an O shape, while little Zhao Yang's eyes widened. The two babies looked curiously at the two adults on the big bed. They seemed to have seen this scene before. It seemed to be in a comic book. Xiaoshan's voice was crisp and clear. Yang, are they fighting with the fairies? Little Zhao Yang shook his head. I don't think so. I think they are comparing martial arts. He had been reading a martial arts comic book recently. It's a fight between fairies. It's a fight between martial arts. Brother is using a move. Little Zhao Yang scratched his head. He could not think of anything. A fight between fairies. A fight between martial arts. On the bed, Tang Yu's face darkened. He quickly covered himself and Pei Chichi with the quilt. After a while, he scolded the two curious babies at the door. Go downstairs. Who let them come up? Chapter 1042. Poor little Zhao Yang, even though Xiaoshan is older by 2 months, he still says she is his little sister and always gives in to his little sister. Even the one who suffers fiercely is him. Little Zhao Yang made a no sound, not daring to challenge Tang Yu's authority. But the pampered Xiaoshan dared. The little person wearing a little skirt flew over like a wisp of smoke. The little hand lifted the quilt at once. Poor Tang Yu, who was preparing to exercise hard, was scared to death. At this moment, Tang Yu, for the first time, felt what it meant to have nothing to live for. But the little person in front of him who was giggling was his own daughter. He glared at Xiaoshan, but Xiaoshan was not afraid of Kuj at all, and even turned her head to continue the discussion with little Zhao Yang. It's a fight between demons. Look at the one who doesn't even wear clothes when fighting. Zhao Yang touched his head, feeling that what Xiaoshan said was very reasonable. Tang Yu felt that this sex life was simply unbearable. He immediately put on his bathrobe, jumped out of bed, and carried them downstairs, one in each hand. Downstairs, Lin Yun, Zhao Yi, and even Tang Jiyuan were also there. Today, they actually came to discuss Tang Yu and Pei Chichi's wedding date. Just now, Xiaoshan went upstairs to call them, but now they saw the male lead carrying them downstairs, one in each hand. Tang Yu quickly threw them to Lin Yun, his voice simple. Sit first, I'll come down in an hour. Did it take an hour to wear clothes? Everyone present was a little puzzled. At this moment, Xiaoshan's big eyes flashed with tears. Kuj is bullying big sister, they are fighting with demons. Little Zhao Yang inherited Zhao Yi's calmness. The 2 or 3-year-old child nodded in agreement. I can testify. The adults all laughed, and also understood why Tang Yu lost his composure just now. Really, that is not a fight between demons. Lin Yun held back her laughter. Kuj and big sister are working hard to give Xiaoshan a little sister. Xiaoxin's eyes twinkled like little stars. The little fellow was very smart. She tilted her little head and asked softly, "Can Kuj and Big Sister have children? Aren't they close relatives? Also, our children should call me auntie." The adults laughed again, not knowing how to explain it. At the very least, Tang Yu should be the one to explain it to Xiaoxin. However, Tang Yu felt that it would be better for Lin Yun to explain it to Xiaoxin, so no one had ever told Xiaoxin about her background. Upstairs, Tang Yu returned to his bedroom. This time, he locked the door. He walked up to her softly and pulled her into his arms. His big hands moved down shamelessly as he closed his eyes and chuckled, "The baby is still waiting for me." Pei Chichi heard the noise downstairs and knew that Lin Yun was coming. She didn't want to do it with him, so she patted him and said, "No, get up." However, he ignored her and carried her to the balcony. From here, they could easily hear the sound from downstairs. "Tang Yu, you're crazy." Her little hand hit his shoulder, and her voice was very soft, for fear that he would hear it. Tang Yu chuckled softly, his big palm pressed down on her, and there was a touch of indulgence in his dark eyes. "Lower your voice later." She hugged him shamelessly, bit her little mouth, and said in a low voice, "Tang Yu, go back to bed. Our baby likes to do it on the bed." He chuckled and carried her back to the bed as she wished. The soft mattress sunk deep into his body. In less than half an hour, it had been ruined beyond recognition by him. His ferocity seemed to make up for a week's worth of food. Pei Chichi would rather go to work. Chapter 1043. Lin Yun and the others waited for an hour, 2 hours, and finally, when Tang Yu came down for lunch, Pei Chichi couldn't get up and fell asleep. The two men shook their heads in disapproval as they watched Tang Yu come down in a refreshed manner. Lin Yun also felt embarrassed. He was almost 30 years old, couldn't he control himself a little? "Let's eat." Tang Yu was in a good mood. He walked up to his mother and naturally lowered his head to kiss her on the cheek. Lin Yun laughed. "You still know to come down." Tang Yu smiled faintly. His noble demeanor did not diminish in the slightest. "It's rare for me to rest." He paused. "Chichi has been very busy recently. She works late every night. I should spend more time with her." "All right," the adults all understood in an instant. At the dining table, Lin Yun talked about the wedding. Tang Yu thought for a moment. "I've discussed it with Chichi. We plan to hold the party on Chichi's cruise ship. The ceremony will be simple." Lin Yun and Tang Jiyuan looked at each other and said gently, "That's good. I'm afraid it will take some time to convince the old man." Tang Yu smiled. "I'll do it." Lin Yun thought about it and agreed. Her son was the best way to deal with the old man. Then, Lin Yun thought of something and asked Tang Yu, "How's Shan?" Tang Yu sighed. "It's fine. It's just that Mrs. Shun has lost a lot of weight because of Shun Lian. Her spirit is not the same as before. After all, she had been through a few blows and it was beyond her mental endurance." Lin Yun nodded. "It's been hard on her. I heard that Shun Lian is going to be sent to a nursing home abroad." Tang Jiyuan felt a bit upset in his heart. After all, he and Shen Zhongshan used to be friends, and he had never mentioned that Shen Zhongshan and Zhao Ku had such a thing. If he had mentioned it, he would never have married Zhao Ku. Later, Tang Xin was still Shen Zhongshan's child. In the end, Tang Jiyuan was the biggest fool. He had lost Lin Yun for nothing. At this time, Tang Yu nodded. "Yes. Shen Zhongshan and Mrs. Shun have decided to emigrate and may not come back again." Shen Zhongshan's attendance at their wedding was the last gift to Chichi. Shen Zhongshan gave Jin Taihe to Pei Chichi and the rest of his life to Mrs. Shun and Shen Lian. He went back to the beginning and used the rest of his life to atone for their sins. This was also one reason why Mrs. Shun was so calm. But Tang Yu knew that Shen Zhongshan did this partly for Pei Chichi. He wanted to bring Shen Lian away so that Chi would not be in danger anymore. Chi knew that he was doing this for her, but she could not say it out loud. Later, Tang Jiyuan found Shen Zhongshan for a drink. Shen Zhongshan couldn't drink, so he used tea to apologize to Tang Jiyuan. Tang Jiyuan waved his hand and said calmly, What are you talking about? He looked at Shen Zhongshan's slightly obese appearance and sighed. Brother Zhongshan, if that woman, Zhao Ku, were to come back to life and see you like this, do you think she would still be so loyal to you? Shen Zhongshan's old face fell. He smiled helplessly and took a sip of tea. Jiyuan, why are you mocking me again? It's been so many years. His gaze was deep. Fine, let's just say it. We old friends may not have the chance to talk like this in the future. Tang Jiyuan quietly filled his cup with tea. The one who suffered the most was Tang Xin, that innocent child. The servant carefully pushed open the bedroom door. Sir. Tang Jiyuan was still standing with his back to her. He said softly, today is Tang Xin's birthday. Don't forget to cook some noodles for her birthday. The eyes of the servants in the house reddened. Everyone knew that Tang Xin was not Sir's child, but Sir still loved her very much. Even when he passed away, he would not forget her birthday. Sir, you treat the young lady very well, the servant said. Tang Jiyuan sighed softly. Okay. He did not think that he had spent too little time with her when Tang Xin was still alive. Pei Chichi blushed. He was teaching the child bad things. Tang Yu gave her a look to calm down, then patiently talked to Xiaoshen about the common physiological knowledge. As he talked, Pei Chichi laughed and covered her mouth. You talk to her slowly, I'm going to brush my teeth. Well, in the future, Xiaoxin's sex education can be handed over to the child's father. Chapter 1046. Xiaoshen laid on Ku's body and asked in a soft and adorable voice, Kuj, does that mean that once Ku's tadpoles enter Chichi's body, they can become babies? Xiaoxin's little face turned into a pancake in an instant, and her eyes widened in disbelief. It turned out that when Kuj and her sister were fighting in the Vixen, Kuj had shot a hidden weapon at her sister. No wonder her sister would cry, it must have been very painful. How pitiful. Xiaoshen revealed a sympathetic gaze. Tang Yu was amused. He reached out to stroke Xiaoxin's soft and delicate little curly hair and dropped a bombshell. Xiaoshen was created by Kuj and her sister like this. Xiaoxin's eyes widened as she stared at Tang Yu. She was a smart child. After Tang Yu had said so much, this little person would naturally overthink. For example, many people usually said that she didn't look that much like little Zhao Yang, and some people said that she looked like Kuj. Was she really the hidden weapon Kuj used to hit her sister? Tears welled up in Xiaoxin's eyes, and like crystals, they fell to the ground. I am not a hidden weapon, Xiaoshen is not a hidden weapon. Tang Yu was stunned. This wasn't the main point, alright. Although he was eager to tell her the truth, he still couldn't bear to let Xiaoshen cry. It was better to coax her first. Xiaoshen cried her heart out in his arms. Her plump little body lay in his arms, and her chubby little feet hooked around his waist. Tang Yu's heart melted. Papa. Xiaoxin's little face rested on his shoulder. She cried and said in a soft voice, Xiaoshen is not a hidden weapon, Xiaoshen is not. Tang Yu froze. What did Xiaoshen call him just now? He couldn't believe it, so he turned little Xinxin's little face and looked at her seriously. Little Xinxin was still crying, and she called out Papa again and again. Tang Yu hugged the chubby little person. His voice was so gentle that he almost didn't recognize it. His voice was slightly hoarse. Baby, what did you say? Papa. Little Xiaoshen proudly rested her little face on his shoulder, her little hands hugging his neck tightly. With great difficulty, Tang Yu suppressed the excitement in his heart and closed his eyes. How did Xiaoshen guess? Baby already knows. The chubby little guy's voice was soft and low. If he teased her again, she wouldn't say anything. Tang Yu's heart was extremely soft. He kissed her little heart and said, then you must know that big sister is Mama, right? Xiaoshen did not make a sound and laid on his shoulder with tears in her eyes. She pursed her lips and looked very cute. What's wrong, baby? Do you know that Mama is unhappy? Tang Yu coaxed the little girl and looked at Pei Chichi, who was standing at the bathroom door. He was obviously a little nervous. He gave her an expression that said to wait for a while, then pursed his lips and patted the little person in his arms. Little Shinshin raised her eyes and secretly glanced at Pei Chichi. She buried her little round face again and said in a low voice, "Baby, don't want it." Tang Yu was a little helpless, but he still coaxed her patiently. "Why not?" Little Shinshin pouted. "Because baby is a hidden weapon and it hurt big sister." Tang Yu couldn't help but laugh. This little girl. He looked at Pei Chichi's slightly red face and said with a smile, "The one who hurt big sister is daddy, not baby." "Really?" Little Shinshin came back to life and there were little stars in her eyes. The days passed happily until the eve of their wedding. Little Wen held a bachelor party for Pei Chichi. It was held in a small bar with a particularly good atmosphere. Pei Huan, who had just finished her confinement, was invited, as well as Pei Chichi's colleagues from Jiaran magazine, Amy, and the others. When Xiaowen suggested it, Pei Chichi asked Tang Yu for his opinion. Mr. Tang sat on the sofa with a calm expression. "As long as you don't play with one eye, it's fine." Chapter 1048. Before she could finish her sentence, her waist was held by his large palm. Then, she was kissed. Their tongues intertwined, and he took possession of her completely, not letting go of a single inch. "Tang Yu." Pei Chichi called his name helplessly. She tugged at his expensive shirt until it became a long crease. Tang Yu got up and carried her to the bedroom. She was thrown onto the soft bed. Her long black hair was scattered all over the pillow, and her pajamas were rolled up to her knees. It felt smooth. A small, tender leg challenged his determination. Tang Yu stood at the end of the bed, looking abstinent, but his slender fingers were unbuttoning his shirt. His thin lips gently spat out a sentence, "Very good, Pei Chichi, I think I should squeeze you dry first." When he said the last sentence, he had already leaned over and touched her red lips with his fingers. Pei Chichi couldn't help laughing. "Tang Yu, this should be said by a woman. But, the person who wants to have a bachelor party is not me." His fingers teased her little tongue shamelessly, and his eyes were filled with passion, which indirectly tempted her. She was originally laughing, but gradually, she couldn't laugh anymore. Her little face was flushed with passion, and she accepted his kiss. But he really kept kissing her, and kissing her. After a long time, she kicked him willfully. "Tang Yu." She rubbed her little feet against him, begging him silently. His thin lips covered her ears, and his voice was low and husky. "Be good, beg me," she said obediently. But Tang Yu still had fire in his heart, and this was not enough. He tortured her even more. "Say, brother." He said the last two words in a low voice. Pei Chichi reached out and hit him after hearing it. "Jerk." She bit her lips and glared at him. Tang Yu laughed hoarsely and coaxed her. No matter how much Pei Chichi wanted it, she couldn't say it. Mr. Tang raised his eyebrows and gently stroked her little face with his fingers. "Chichi, are you really not going to say it? If you don't say it, I'm going to get serious." She didn't believe that he had any real skills. 10 minutes, half an hour later, Pei Chichi hummed softly, crawled into his arms like a kitten, and obediently said those two words. After that, she bit his shoulder. "He is too wicked." After that, she didn't have the chance to think about anything else. She was tormented by him and didn't have the strength to think about anything else. He didn't let her go until 5 o'clock before dinner. Mr. Tang took a shower, changed his clothes, and stood at the head of the bed. Pei Chichi was still asleep. His slender fingers gently touched her little face, smiling silently. "Chichi, get up." "Oh," she turned over. "So tired. Your bachelor party is at 7:30, you can prepare now." He kindly reminded her, feeling sour in his heart. Pei Chichi turned over again. "So noisy. I reminded you." Tang Yu said happily and happily went downstairs to have dinner with Xiaoxin. Xiaoshan looked at the young and handsome Papa and climbed into his arms. Papa, did you hit Mama with a hidden weapon again? She paused and carefully looked at Tang Yu, full of expectation. Is Xiaoshan going to have a sister soon? Tang Yu sweated. He had a vasectomy. Even if he ran out of bullets, it would be useless. Does Xiaoshan want another sister? He held Xiaoshan and asked seriously. Xiaoshan nodded hard and seriously. When it came to this, Pei Huan had the right to speak. He snorted, "You guys don't know how dark Tang Yu's heart is. Sometimes, during banquets, he would leave hickeys on Chichi's body because he didn't want her to wear low-cut clothes or clothes that exposed her back." Amy's little Wen screamed. Also, if she looks at other men more and says that other men are good-looking, she won't be able to sleep at night. She won't dare to look at them again. Pei Huan's face was full of disdain. Such a man looks noble, but is actually very coquettish. He won't say anything and won't show it. He's just. Chapter 1050. Amy held her face in her hands, her cheeks blushing. Wow, so charming. And rich. Please give me a dozen of such men. Pei Huan couldn't stand her and snorted. Let's see if you have the physical strength to play with a domineering CEO in bed first. Amy didn't agree with that. Pei Chichi's body isn't as sturdy as mine. She was too embarrassed to say that she was a girl. Pei Huan sneered at Amy's naivety. You know, Pei Chichi and I grew up together. Let me give you an example. Even if there were two of me, I wouldn't be able to defeat her. Pei Chichi had never learned martial arts, but she was very strong. In fact, Pei Huan really wanted to wipe her tears. The beast in her house was so strong that she needed to take good care of it. It had only been 42 days, and that beast, Khan Mingzhu, had been pressing her down and doing it day and night. Her waist was about to break, and she hadn't rested a day for a week. She wanted to relax today, but Pei Chichi hadn't come yet. What a disappointment. They had prepared a fierce man for Pei Chichi, the kind with Xiong's fur. Pei Chichi had always been envious that she could pluck Laro Khan's fur, so they found one for her. But the main character didn't come. Xiao Wen asked worriedly, what about the man? He was only willing to pluck it after paying 50,000 yuan. Pei Huan looked at Amy. Oh, let her have it easy. She's the only one without a man here. Amy snorted. Pei Huan, you really know how to poke at people's heart. Pei Huan hooked her arm and looked at her seductively. Then, Amy, if you don't want it, give it to me. Amy thought about it and snorted. Change to a set. I don't want to pluck Xiong's fur. I want real bullets. Xiao Wen was stunned by Amy's bold and unrestrained attitude and swallowed her saliva. Pei Huan was also a little drunk. She patted Amy. Good. It's my treat. Add 100,000 yuan. You can play however you want. So, it was a wise move for Tang Yu not to let Pei Chichi come. In the wee hours of the morning, Pei Chichi suddenly woke up. He opened his eyes and grabbed his phone to look at the time. Then, he covered his eyes and howled. She climbed onto Tang Yu's body and bit his neck. Tang Yu, why didn't you wake me up? She bit his neck angrily, wishing she could eat his flesh. Pei Chichi, I called you a few times, but you were the one who said you were sleepy. He patted her, indicating for her to come down, but Pei Chichi refused to come down and continued to stay in his arms. You did it on purpose. She bit her lip and looked at him accusingly. How did he seduce her at that time, torturing her to the point where she wished she was dead, whetting her appetite, coaxing her to come in, brother? She had already said such shameful words, yet he still schemed against her. Pei Chichi bit his neck angrily again. Tang Yu let her do as she pleased, only reminding her, Mrs. Tang, our wedding is in 10 hours. Are you sure you want me to bring a neck full of hickeys to the wedding? She hung on him like a little monkey, her slender limbs clinging onto him. She hummed softly. I don't care. She was like that, biting disobediently, like a little kitten. Tang Yu lowered his head. Suddenly, he asked in a very soft voice, "Pei Chichi, do you want to enjoy the man that Xiao Wen prepared for you?" The little kitten on his body stopped biting. It raised its eyes and looked at him, its gaze a little dazed. "How did Tang Yu know?" You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.